Has Trump's Education Secretary, Betsy DeVos, struck a blow for campus fairness? Or has she further entrenched anti-male assumptions in Title IX? Join me as I review her defense of the new sexual misconduct rules for U.S. colleges. The revised Title IX regulations have at last been released after years of consultation. And contrary to the uproar surrounding them, they don't represent a dramatic change for colleges dealing with sexual misconduct allegations. Despite sky-is-falling shouts from feminist organizations and a lawsuit by the American Civil Liberties Union, not that much will be different for accuser and accused. The regulations still require colleges to adjudicate sexual misconduct, a task they are woefully ill-equipped to do properly. They still allow tribunals to use the preponderance of the evidence model, which is the lowest possible standard, and they still provide the accuser with the right to appeal a decision by the tribunal, opening the accused to double jeopardy. The sensible amendments, such as narrowing the definition of sexual harassment, allowing accused students to hire lawyers, and mandating that they see written statements of the case against them, while good, amount to little more than tinkering with a disastrously bad structure. I'm currently reading the more than 2,000-page regulations document, but for now, I'll make a few comments on Secretary DeVos's video presenting the guidelines. As I listened to her justify the approach her department has taken, I was dumbfounded by the extent to which feminist presuppositions about rape and justice have influenced even this supposedly non-feminist reformer. DeVos begins by referring to rape as a campus scourge.
2 years ago, I made a promise to address the scourge of sexual misconduct on our nation's campuses.
Scourge implies a widespread problem having a major impact on students' abilities to pursue education, but it is not clear from reputable surveys that this is actually the case. The National College Health Assessment, a large survey of 26,000 students carried out by the American College Health Association in 2018, found that 3.2% of female students reported experiencing sexual penetration without their consent in the previous year. It's not clear whether all or even most of the survey respondents regarded the non-consensual sex as rape, and it's also not clear whether it occurred at college. Clearly, the figure is not the notorious 1 in 5 women often said to be sexually assaulted while in college. Interestingly, male students surveyed reported a higher rate, 3.5% of physical assault. Yet it's difficult to imagine, to say the least, the Secretary of Education announcing a nationwide strategy to enable colleges to deal with the problem of physical assault of male students. Perhaps not coincidentally, when female students were asked about excess drinking, 20.4% reported consuming 5 or more alcoholic drinks in one sitting just in the previous 2 weeks, and 2.7% admitted that they had had non-consensual sex while drunk. Such statistics suggest that a great deal of non-consensual sex could be eliminated simply by reducing alcohol consumption amongst college students. But this is not a narrative with any legs for feminist opinion makers or politicians. The emphasis is always on female victimization. DeVos goes on to declare that sexual misconduct is unacceptable.
No student's learning journey should include surviving sexual misconduct. No student should be made to feel alone or abandoned by their school. No incident should ever be swept under the rug, and no student or teacher accused should be punished before evidence proves responsibility.
This isn't a bad statement, including as it does the stipulation that punishment should not precede evidence of responsibility, and more on this later. But the wording, which must have been carefully crafted, is unsettling. Why not say no accused should be punished unless evidence proves responsibility, rather than before? The meaning is substantively the same, but the implication is quite different. To say that no accused should be punished before responsibility is proven suggests that guilt will in most cases be found. To say no one should be punished unless responsibility is proven makes a far stronger case for presumption of innocence, which is supposedly the major reform DeVos has made to the regulations. DeVos's stress on the need for evidence is heartening, but it's far from sufficient to reassure those of us who have watched the college campus nightmare. So let's see how she rolls out her vision.
Today, we announce a final rule that recognizes we can continue to combat sexual misconduct without abandoning our core values of fairness, presumption of innocence, and due process. Our rule empowers survivors like never before. The pain suffered by each survivor due to sexual misconduct can be lasting and profound.
Not so great. I would have liked DeVos to pause over her emphasis on presumption of innocence and due process before moving on to the obligatory tribute to empowering survivors. By survivors, of course, and it's a word she uses far too many times, she is referring exclusively to alleged victims of sexual misconduct, not to victims of false allegations. Survivor is a feminist term applied almost exclusively to female accusers in order to make it seem that the accusation must be true. Yet from Emma Sulkovitz to Rolling Stone's Jackie, from Crystal Mangum to Nikki Uvino, and many more, there have been plenty of high and low profile instances of false accusations that profoundly damaged innocent men's lives. In the last mentioned case, for example, college girl Nikki Uvino claimed that 2 football players from her school raped her at an off-campus party. She later confessed to police that she made up the double allegation because it was the first thing that came to mind after she'd had consensual sex in the ladies' washroom with the 2 men. She was a real class act, hoping that her story of rape would help her win sympathy from a potential boyfriend. The 2 men, one of whom testified at her sentencing, where she plea bargained for a year in jail, lost their scholarships and their chance to play college football. These horrific stories of lives ruined deserve recognition. These men's pain is also lasting and profound. But we don't hear a word about it from DeVos. Her emphasis is on the horror of sexual violation as she continues.
These gross acts are often about control and power. Those who have no control over themselves attempt to exert it over others.
Oh gee. From this point early in the presentation, the discussion becomes more and more feminist in its rhetoric and presuppositions. The idea that sexual misconduct is all about control and power rather than desire is purely feminist, invoking the Duluth model of domestic violence and radical feminists such as Andrea Dworkin. In the context of campus sexual misconduct, it nullifies the possibility for a humane, non-ideological understanding of the reality of alcohol-fueled lust, miscommunication, and youthful recklessness. If sexual misconduct is about power and control by a male perpetrator, then the woman has no sexual power of her own and no responsibility for communicating clearly, knowing her own desires, and limiting her alcohol consumption. DeVos's acceptance of unscientific claims signals her capitulation to a feminist paradigm in which the harm to women of male sexuality is taken for granted as is evident from her discussion about the need for schools to provide immediate assistance to complainants.
With our rule, if a student is harmed, he or she has control over what happens next. Under our rule, schools must offer survivors help they can't get anywhere else. Although survivors may wish to file a police report or sue in court, Title IX protects their education, separate and apart from what the police or the courts may do. Under our rule, schools must offer free, personalized services that help survivors keep their education on track. Under our rule, survivors are empowered to make themselves heard and to then determine the kind of school-level response that will best support their needs. This approach protects them from suffering trauma all over again. No matter which path a survivor chooses, they always have the right to supportive measures that help them heal and continue their education. These measures include academic course adjustments, counseling, no-contact orders, dorm reassignments, leaves of absence, and class schedule changes. These are things schools can do almost immediately to make an important difference for survivors.
Basically, as soon as a student alleges she's been harassed or assaulted, the school must move heaven and earth to accommodate her every academic or personal requirement. Fine. But two worrisome developments are noticeable. The first is that all the support is for survivors. Support services for the allegedly innocent until proven guilty accused are not even mentioned. What about their trauma, their anxiety, their questions, their distractedness, their PTSD, their needs? Does their education not deserve to be protected? It seems not. And notice how the alleged trauma of the survivor is already assumed, even though no investigation has yet been carried out by the school, and even though the survivor may request that no investigation be carried out ever. Notice how quickly the presumption of innocence, alleged to be a core value, falls away from the discussion. In fact, any number of the services to be offered survivors, especially that no contact order, assumes and affirms the accused's guilt. Whether any investigation is ever undertaken, the accused student is considered a threat, potentially removed from his classes, forbidden to contact his accuser, forbidden to be where she is on campus, and so on. From this point on, though DeVos does mention presumption of innocence as an idea, the examples and details she provides skate right by it. After discussing all the problems with the implementation of the Obama-era regulations, she makes the following pitch about justice.
Justice is not a political issue. It can only come from a process everyone can trust, a process widely believed to deliver fair and reliable results. The outcome of the failed approach created by the previous administration's letter was a lack of faith in the system, a lack of confidence in the outcomes. And that's not fair to anyone, most of all survivors. Too often, these young women and men suffered unthinkable acts, mustered the courage to report them, endured a grievance process, and thought they had achieved justice, only to have it overturned in courts of law.
Whoa! Here, the bias in favor of the alleged survivor completely overshadows concern for the accused, whose rights were violated and who often many years later, after his public shaming as a rapist and the loss of his career dreams after the stress and horror and depression of having everything he worked for destroyed, finally had the injustice he endured recognized in a court of law. His pain, his terror, his outrage, his damaged standing in his community, none of these visibly registers with DeVos. All she can see, it appears, is the frustration of the accuser who witnesses the college ruling overturned, though the accuser is not in any way harmed by that overturning. The message is clear. The system has failed the accusing women, not the men whose constitutional rights were violated and who had to spend years clearing their names and seeking legal restitution. DeVos refuses to face the obvious fact that at least some, if not most, of the allegations against these accused men were either fabricated, frivolous, or simply not acts of assault or harassment at all. At this point, she has either consciously capitulated to the feminist worldview or is so deep in denial that she doesn't know what she's talking about. The problem, I realized as I came near the end of DeVos's statement, is that she can't bring herself to use the phrase false accusation. It doesn't appear in her video presentation at all, as far as I could tell, and without it, the real importance of due process can never be fully defended. When she finally mentions the hundreds of successful lawsuits exposing the bad treatment of the men, she carefully chooses cases that don't involve a lying or malicious accuser. In one of these cases, the accuser was a third-party witness, and the girlfriend of the accused wasn't even consulted or allowed to testify on behalf of the accused. So even though he was the one who went through the hell of the accusation, the woman was also to some extent an injured party. Certainly she wasn't the cause of his troubles. Here it is.
Those who insist that the previous administration's letter worked well can't ignore 171 lawsuits which found students' rights were not respected in campus proceedings. Many of those cases are disturbing. One involves a ROTC student who was accused of groping his ex-girlfriend while she was sleeping. The school found him responsible and suspended him without hearing from the ex-girlfriend herself, without citing evidence, and without allowing him to present evidence of his own. So the young man, training to serve his country, sued his way to the U.S. Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals.
DeVos's inability or refusal to discuss false allegations requires that she twist herself into various verbal pretzels to avoid ever blaming an accusing woman, even going so far as to claim that due process is not just for the accused, as if we should always be mainly concerned with the needs and requirements of women, even when it is the man's career and reputation that hang in the balance.
Our rule restores due process protections for students on both sides of a Title IX incident, because due process is not just for the accused. California's Second District Court of Appeal ruled that when the accused does not receive a fair hearing, neither does the accuser. Our rule requires that a fair grievance process must include the right to written notice of allegations, the right to an advocate, who may be, but does not need to be, an attorney, and the right to submit, examine, and challenge evidence. When a survivor and alleged perpetrator disagree about what happened, an unbiased decision-maker needs to reach a factually correct conclusion.
What? Did she just mention a survivor and an alleged perpetrator disagreeing about what happened? Well, the language says it all. Obviously, if one is a survivor, the other must logically be a perpetrator. Even in DeVos's choice of words, we see the decisive triumph of victim hagiography. And how do we know that the decision maker will be unbiased, as she mentions? College campuses across the United States are awash in far-left feminist radicalism and identity politics in which believing women is an article of faith. Where are these unbiased decision makers to be found, and what is the nature of their legal training and experience in investigation, interviewing, cross-examination, and weighing evidence? Furthermore, does anybody really believe that the low standard of preponderance of the evidence is sufficient in a case where an accused faces expulsion from college for an alleged rape? DeVos's new rule is a recipe for further wrongful convictions and many more lawsuits. I believe colleges have no business trying students accused of sexual misconduct, so even if DeVos had extensively revised the Title IX rules, I'd still be dissatisfied. But I could at least have admired her effort. But as it is, DeVos's intervention is an almost unmitigated failure. It fails because it doesn't imagine the tribunal process even for a moment from the male accused's point of view. It doesn't accept that male suffering really matters. Gynocentrism, not fairness, is its core value.